Bye 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 bye.
Hello, Jody Raynsford. Hello, listener.
Hello, David Hellard. Hello, listener. Hello, viewer.
Hello, I mean, who are we kidding? Hello, listener. And we're doing a bit of a special today. If special is the right word.
Special is exactly the word you want to use when you think about us.
Yes, very much so. Because we've done a lot of we've spoken a lot about we always speak about drugs the whole time.
We love drugs.
Yeah, we do. We genuinely
we are pro drugs conversations. We are pro drugs conversations.
And I haven't got a sense whether the listener is completely bored by.
I've got a sense whether the listener is pro or anti-drugs, whether they like doping. I don't know. Our audience, it could go either way.
But it just seems, to me, it defines our sport, even if it's not acknowledged as defining our sport the whole time.
We've become cycling. We've become cycling, haven't we? That's it.
Well, the crazy thing is, this is partly because we wanted to do a special around a certain topic, partly because of what happened on the Golden Trail when I was in the States, partly because no one's really talked about Quartz, and it seems to be really controversial to runners, to athletes, high-level athletes, particularly in the States as well, and UTMB, Golden Trail. But then also, this is because having failed to talk about Mark Ngogo when we were talking about Sierra Zanau, we're now going to talk about him again because he's been done for doping.
Oh, so, you remember his name now, David. You remember his name down. When he's on the up, you forget it. When he's on the down, that's when you remember it. Unbelievable. You are part of the problem.
But having said that, my page is now being blocked, so I can't read the. But
I think I say this for a lot of people. What the fuck is Quartz? Like, what does that mean? Is that something you haven't watched? Like, I have no idea what you're talking about when you say Quartz.
We're going to get to that, but before that.
Oh, so I'm not supposed to know that. That's good. That's good. I thought it was just another major thing that I was unaware of that someone will beat me around the head with on social media later. Great. Perfect.
But this is the thing that blows my mind. So we've often we've tried to look at all aspects of doping to try and understand it, really. Some of it to try and be sympathetic to individuals that maybe they won't in the future. Some of it trying to understand what happened in the Oregon project, to understand TUEs, to understand what happened with the Russian doping situation, with the Stepanovs, with Rob Kohler, trying to understand how WADA works. And we're always highlighting and taking the piss out of Russian dopers because of their systematic doping. But what I read recently that blew my mind, how many Kenyans do you think typically have doped in the last 5 years?
Because you don't hear about it that much, I'd say like a handful. I wouldn't say a huge amount. I would say it was barely, for whatever reason.
So this blew my mind. This article was written on the 11th of October. So far this year, as of a month ago, 21 Kenyan athletes have been sanctioned for alleged doping.
Really?
Yeah. 21.
21? Is that consistent each year? Is that higher than normal?
I have no idea. I mean, the hard thing is that you'll rarely find out about athletes who are caught outside the big events, and so this to me is the reason. I mean, we talked about systematic doping. Maybe this isn't, but with the situation with Mark Ngogo, who's come, and it's controversial, his whole situation, to do with Quartz, but he was an athlete who wasn't. When no one was watching for him, no one was watching. We didn't know his name because he wasn't looking like he would be in the top 10.
Yeah.
No one had heard of him before. He'd never run a race over of 30 kilometers. And And so what I really want to understand, and we're going to hopefully do this in a future podcast, is how are there 21 Kenyan dopers, and who does the fault lie with? Because is this to do with at what point do drugs come in the system? Because there's clearly a massive issue here, and if there's ever a reason to treat a country differently, surely it's 21 dopers.
Yeah, I mean, how does that compare? How does that compare with other countries?
In fact, because it's insanely high.
Oh, is it?
Insanely, yeah, absolutely. Particularly because so many of them are relating to marathons as well.
And so what you're saying is, like, if we're treating Russia in this way, then why aren't we looking at Kenya in the same way?
Yeah, and also why isn't World Athletics actually saying, look, we've got a problem here, and actually just coming out and saying we need to address this. We need to understand why this is happening, who the drivers are, how we can actually stop it. And it doesn't seem as if that is happening. So
just out of curiosity, like, how have you, this article that you found and you read about, like, is this in somewhere well known? Like, what? Yeah, I mean, like, is this doesn't seem to be that big a deal. Like, is someone trying to make this a big deal, or is this just kind of something you stumbled across, or
something I've stumbled across as another? And I'll see if I can find any other reference to it. It's just a random article that that's been picked up by a few different organizations, but it just seems crazy that, and it's only been since Mark has been sanctioned or flagged that it's accompanying that rather than being its own headline.
Right.
So, and even here, talking about, and there have been other, in addition to Mark, there have been other very high profile. So, Boston Marathon winner Diana Kipchoge suspended after failed drug test. Boston 2021, that's a massive one. Compatriot Betty Wilson Lempus previously suspended.
And these suspensions, I take it they come well outside the like the fanfare of the race and the win and everything. It normally happens like a few weeks afterwards, and so it's kind of low key. Especially if it's won by someone that that either wasn't expected to win it or probably doesn't have a profile that's maybe as high as someone else.
Or even if they do have a profile, we've discussed in the past about how, and we've been accused of adding to the issue the fact that we as a West don't know who all the runners are. There's so many talented Kenyan runners that are constantly changing, that actually, when a new Kenyan runner, and you look at the time in Chicago was super fast. Time in Berlin, all these new runners who are coming out, debut marathons with insanely fast times, and granted some of them Ethiopian, and if then an athlete that we've never heard of until this year is done for doping, they disappear. And there's so many talented runners that it seems to just almost be a factory of runners coming through anyway. So firstly, an appeal to people listening to the podcast: if you know someone who is on the ground, who might actually be able to talk incisively about when this is coming into the system, I'd love to know. And someone like Mark is managed. He has a management team who brought him over. He trains in a European group. Like, what is the relationship there? Because for me, if an athlete is part of a group, the whole group is tainted. like a training group, and it doesn't mean they're all following a similar. They're all having similar nutrition as such, but if I was a European training group, I'd see it as my responsibility to instill within my athletes what the rules are to ensure that they're not jeopardizing themselves in this way for their future career, and because it impacts on everyone, and that's clearly not happening either. So do better. Firstly, any suggestions of good people to talk about this, but not linked directly to it, but on that, Quartz.
What is it? I thought it was something to do with your watch. Is it something you watch?
How often do you think you've heard of Quartz? Like, is it something that's run across your bow as such, or something you've never been aware of? Or
the first time I'd heard of Quartz is when I accidentally went onto our Instagram, the BBR Instagram, and and there was some heated discussion about Quartz, and I was thinking, aye, what's going on? That must have been a big night out, but actually something to do with doping or dope testing or something like that. That is the first I'd heard of it when you were talking about it in relation to Golden Trail. So yeah, no idea what it is. Explain for the ignorant host and listener who doesn't know what this is. What is Quartz?
And this is part of the problem. It is quite hard to explain.
Can you do it in the medium of dance?
I can do that.
We need to give something for the YouTube viewers. You've got to have a reason to get on the YouTube and watch this.
But when we look at so Quartz, most people, if they've heard of Quartz, will know it probably through UTMB. But WADA is a world anti-doping agency, and that is directly linked to world athletics and the Olympics. But in running, there's obviously a huge number of independent races, and those races aren't necessarily linked to associations, because for one, if you're Sierra Zanao, if you're UTMB, if you're Western States, why would you just go, all right, now that you've decided to create an association for trail running, I have to become underneath you and follow all these weird rules for people I've never met who are now deciding they're in charge of our sport. So you have all these independent races that aren't linked to associations or aren't linked to WADA, and WADA will test at certain races, and you can pay for WADA to come to some of your races, but it doesn't mean WADA will turn up. And there's also an additional school of thought that to do with WADA that we've talked about over the previous few years, so a few weeks, few months. One of them is the TUEs, which are exemptions, where, for example, having certain inhaler asthma medicine or various other medicines, and we talked about how Lance Armstrong was on 17 of them when he won the Tour de France legally. So there's one school of thought that I agree with, that TUEs are bad for the sport, and that if individuals require medicine to be able to compete, they shouldn't be competing. It's quite harsh, but my view is more that if you allow someone the possibility of cheating, then people will. And so by allowing TUEs, you're allowing people to cheat and gain an unfair advantage. There's another school of thought as well to do with that certain painkillers, most painkillers, can be used unfairly by athletes to get a advantage as well. And those painkillers might be perfectly legal in WADA, because what's the issue with someone who is doing some sports like golf or has a sore? It's very different to endurance, where actually pain is part of your strategy and part of the race itself. But there's also so that's a second element that WADA's felt that it's not helping in. The third element is that WADA doesn't necessarily turn up at every race if you just because you want it to, particularly not globally, and certainly won't necessarily test all the athletes you ask them to. You can't rely on that, and so it means that for certain race series and certain organisations, they haven't got the ability to test all the athletes beforehand. And the fourth element is, what's the fourth element again? Oh, it's to do with belief in athlete welfare. And there are some items that aren't on the banned substance, and TUEs may fall into this as well, that there's a belief that people shouldn't be having these drugs when they race because it's bad for their health. And so while it may be legal, actually the races would rather people don't take anti-inflammatories, because when dehydrated it can lead to serious issues. So because of all these things, Quartz has been set up as one of the solutions. And UTMB and Golden Trail both have a Quartz program, where the idea behind it is it doesn't replace WADA, but it's there and it tests athletes to ensure that they're not using certain TUEs, that they're also not using these they have a separate list of items that people aren't allowed to use when they're racing in these races. So that is Quartz. It's an independent organization set up to help races that aren't necessarily linked to WADA be able to test.
Right. So can I ask some questions? Can I ask some questions first?
Yes,
okay.
Please
right. Before we move on to the next bit. Okay. So TUEs, you're saying that in that situation, that anyone taking any kind of drug or for whatever condition, if they're taking it because they need to function or whatever, then they shouldn't be competing.
Well,
because that may for whatever reason.
And this is where it's slightly nuanced, and this is also where I don't fully understand every part of Quartz or the organisation, because they're not very good at communicating themselves. As you know, yeah. Well,
we went through the story, didn't we? Did we go through the story, or have we gone through the story? We haven't. No, we've gone through the story. We haven't talked about it. Okay, cool.
And there's an element as well. There's lots of elements at play here. One of the elements at play here is that my job could be on the line if I say
yeah, so it's my job to push you to that line. Great. Okay.
Exactly. But
it was really difficult. I came under fire from all angles. It was really hard. It was like Paxman. He was like John Humphreys and Paxman all rolled into one. I couldn't help talk about it.
And it's hard to know, because I've not said, I've not asked, can I talk freely about this? And I am as much as I am very free.
To be fair, if they're hiring a co-host of Bad Boy Running, it's the equivalent of Radio 4 getting Miriam Margolis on and expecting her not to fucking swear. Like, people know exactly. People know what they're getting. And for you, we're hiding because we expect him to be discreet. Yeah, like it's not going to happen. So I think you're perfectly okay. I've got you covered, man. You can talk about whatever you want.
Oh, and actually, there's a fifth element as well that I hadn't mentioned, which is
great film. Great film.
It's
Bruce Willis. It's Bruce Willis. He comes at the last moment. Bada boom, bada bing.
Yeah, and the lead, she looks like my wife. I mean, that's what everyone says. So
she does. She really does.
Yeah.
Does she have that like stripy outfit type thing? That's just do you ever wear that?
God, that's a nightmare, isn't it? Oh, getting Breezy to say multi-pass repeatedly. Oh, that'd be great. You can be the Chris Rock.
Chris Tucker.
Chris Tucker.
Really bad.
But the other element, the fifth element, is also to do with if we look at, for example, CJ Uja, that he's been banned. He's been massively had his name dragged through the dirt because he took something unintentionally. Yeah. And so there's also an element of Quartz which is trying to allow athletes to be able to actually represent properly if something is flagged. and to be able to say, look, this is my profile, this is my health profile. You can see I've not been using these things, and actually here's a product. And so, because I also think that at the moment there is reputation is getting destroyed, massively destroyed, when actually it's a mistake. It's not cheating. Huge difference. But at the moment, the way the system works, you're tied with both. So those those are the elements.
I mean, is it when we're talking about like substances that they might be having, like, of course we talk about things like asthma and stuff. Someone taking asthma medicine and things like that. What about things like, what happens? I mean, this is a weird example. What happens if they're like on antidepressants or something like that, or something that's not directly associated with their physical health, but it's something related to, say, their mental health? Does it? I mean, what kind of level are we talking about in terms of the relevance to performance?
I hadn't actually thought about that. I don't know. I'd have to look at the list. I don't know if antidepressants would be on it, but I don't.
Well, like ADHD meds, or and like anything that kind of will have an impact on things like heart rate, for example.
Yeah,
but
I'd
may not.
Is it Ritalin for ADHD?
If it's what?
Or is that something else? Is it Ritalin for ADHD, or is that something else? I
Ritalin,
think ADHD medicine probably wouldn't be allowed, because that's I think Warren Gatlin was using that as a TUE, and he was arguing he'd had ADHD from a young age. But a good example is for asthma. So through a few cases, they've actually clarified some of the instructions to the athletes. So asthma, for example, if you require an inhaler, and it turns out actually asthma is not a great example. Everyone thinks of inhalers, but it turns out that it's been shown that the types of inhalers that most people use who are asthmatic benefit, unless it's at a really high level. That's fine. But if you are an asthmatic who has the stronger type of inhaler, apparently you're allowed to use it in your training, in your life, but when it comes up to the point of racing, you're not allowed to use it on race day. But if you should need it during a race because you're having an asthma attack, you can use it, but you then don't finish the race. So your health is never at risk, but it can't be used in a way that will aid performance. I think that's my understanding of it. But part of it, so the trouble to different methodologies, and there are elements of Quartz that I think are better in. Well, I think what Quartz is trying to achieve is better in its intentions, but their communication is really bad to the athletes. And there's elements of what they do which is better. For example, when you've tested with Quartz, the sample stays with the person who took the sample, and it's not sent by UPS or DHL or a third-party courier to the testers. It stays with that individual. So that's much better. But then there's other elements that are far worse, where there's not two samples. The pots aren't sealed with labels. It's done in a lot more relaxed way, because up until this point, Quartz's viewpoint has been, you can trust us with Quartz. We've got no reason to jeopardize this, which may be true, but from the point of view of the
athletes, what they all say. That's what they all say.
Yeah, but it doesn't instill trust, right, with the athletes, and the athletes are nervous because their whole livelihood and their reputation is based on this. So you've got this situation where we then have these two different testers. Quartz don't have any authority over WADA, and Quartz can send their samples and various things to WADA. It doesn't mean anything necessarily. And so if someone is banned from, if something is flagged in a test for Golden Trail UTMB, they can be banned from that race and future races. but it doesn't necessarily mean anything for that athlete in everything else in sports.
Oh, okay.
It could do, depending on WADA's reaction to the samples and how that is coordinated. But
so just to be clear, then, so basically, WADA makes like the final decision around all of these things, and Quartz is basically giving a ruling on it, which may be taken by the individual races that have brought Quartz in or whatever, but WADA can choose to do with it what it wants.
Yeah. So WADA, if WADA bans someone, they're banned.
Yeah.
If Quartz bans someone, it would depend on circumstances and WADA and ... So it's just it's almost private testing for a private race, and the impact of that is just relevant to that race, other than relational damage.
So, what's the controversy between athletes then? Like, what's the issue that they find? Why are people kind of, well, they were arguing, so I saw the argument happening. It's like, what? And it's very difficult to jump in the middle of that. What is the issue? Why do some people have an issue with it?
So to then explain and this is what I'm still trying to unpick and understand myself, because in a way now I'm in the middle, because I'm Team Golden Trail, and we are trying to find a way to be able to test our athletes, to keep our sport clean, to protect our athletes, but are aware of how frustrated the athletes are with Quartz and how little they understand actually what Quartz is and what it's doing, and even trust in what it's doing. And this
or how really, poorly Quartz have communicated to those athletes.
I mean, that's one thing I'm very clear on. And this is
so I just want to get the crux of it. So their concern is, because they're not a WADA body, their concern is that Quartz are going to throw something up that could potentially jeopardize their career.
Absolutely.
That's it. Okay, right. Just so that's clear. Okay.
And what's happened to date, the testing protocols for Quartz haven't, the way they collect samples is certainly not as thorough as the way WADA do. Based off Quartz's belief that, well, why would we tamper with anything?
I mean, is that it? Is that really? I mean, like, because it would make sense in order to strengthen it, they would. I mean, what is there? Is there a cost implication or something related to it that causes this? What is the reason?
I don't think there is a massive. I think it's just it's only been flagging its head recently, in a forceful way, that this is the concern, and until this point, they haven't done it because of just easier not to. But
just so I understand. I mean, how does the funding work for this? Who's paying who here? Like, do the races?
Golden Trail and UTMB would pay Quartz to test for these.
Right. Okay. Now, and that's how Quartz are funded, because they are tested. They are funded by individual races who want to bring this testing regime into their races.
Yeah, absolutely. And Quartz would typically test the top 10 favored athletes in advance. Yeah. And so that again is down to, you can't test everyone. There's Quartz is, as we said, UTMB, Golden Trail. So when we went to the States, the hatred of Quartz seems to be magnified.
Oh, really?
Massively.
Oh, right. Why?
I don't know.
You've like walked into a room where everyone's arguing, and no one wants to tell you why.
And I've been trying to defend / position / understand, almost going to bat as the Golden Trail, because partly the Golden Trail are just super busy, the executive team, and don't have time to be involved in Instagram discussions. So we went to Pikes Peak to start with, And one of the athletes, Joe, who's Joseph Gray, very well established American trail runner, a great runner, big champion. He's coming back to Pikes Peak. He's won it many times, and he doesn't want to take a quartz test because he is involved in the the US Olympics. He's involved in USDA, and so he's saying, I don't need to take this test. I am clean. I don't use TUEs. I'm tested by WADA. So I refuse to take this test. And that then obviously is problematic because the Golden Trail and the Golden Trail want everyone to test.
Yeah.
To follow not just to ensure they're clean, but for these other reasons we've said, where they want to ensure people aren't using painkillers, aren't taking drugs that could affect their health, and so it then creates a massive problem of like, what do we do? Because should we allow Joe to run? And what happens if he wins the thing? Because he hasn't tested under our rules, but he's tested under WADA rules. And so that was pretty stressful, so we say. I don't know, Joe.
But why? Why not? Why not allow, as long as you're tested under some rule, some rule of some sort? Is the because he's testing this because he's done the big kind of races that will have that WADA element associated with it, where there's going to be a lot of people who won't have that, and so it's understandable that there will be people on different kind of regimes, surely. So
yeah,
why not allow, say, as long as you've been tested by one or the other? Is that still an issue?
Partly because one, there's no WADA testers at the race. Two,
I see. Okay.
Two, there's a different and part of I think the confusion and is that all of the American athletes who seem to hate Quartz is like, get WADA to test. If you've got a race in America, you pay them, they come, they test. And that may be the case for most races in the States, but trying to do that globally in all cases under the circumstances isn't possible. Right. And so for them, they're like, well, why aren't you getting WADA in? This is dodgy as fuck because we've got WADA and you're not using WADA. And we trust US,
yeah.
And so, and I communicate with Joe through the Instagram post, but actually directly as well.
Yeah.
Because partly I was trying to understand his position, but also I wanted to genuinely explain our position because Quartz has got a real image problem in the States.
Yeah.
And it's, I was getting in now.
Where's Quartz from?
France.
Oh, it had to be, didn't it?
Communication problems.
It had to be.
And that's the thing, and so I was trying to actually give a fair position to the Golden Trail.
Yeah.
So what happened is Joe ran. He ran well. He came third. There was a podium for the Golden Trail, a top 10 that didn't include Joe. The prize money didn't include Joe because that's Golden Trail prize money. Then there was an additional ceremony straight afterwards in the kind of like everyone watching going, what? Not including Joe, where Joe came third and got a different he got a trophy, and there wasn't there aren't Golden Trail trophies in the same way. So that was the solution to it, which was hammered out over lots and lots of conversations between what do the organisation feel, what do the race feel, what do to try and firstly be fair, be legal, secondly, be legal. Thirdly, be pragmatic. And then Joe put a post out about what happened, and I think Joe, and this is where, you know, because I throughout this whole of this episode, I just want to tell the truth and not any insinuation. This is just the facts as I know it, because I think it's really important and interesting. I think Joe felt that his name. So Joe refused to take the test. I don't know why. I still don't know why. I think because to him it's just seen as being a risk, and I think there's an element of where Joe's like, "Screw you! Why should I take your tests when I do WADA?"
I do. I think I do think that is kind of true as a general American sensibility. I think there's a not because anyone's doing anything in terms of like anything untoward. It's just like, you know, I've played by the rules according to like my country.
Yeah.
And, you know, why should I be made to jump through hoops by this other organization that comes outside? And that's particularly true in America. And so you kind of, I mean, I think America has a very different has a different attitude, and I don't think it's necessarily a wrong attitude or anything else like that. I mean, you know, the question is, you know, he is doing everything according to what
his country asked of him.
What his country asked of him, exactly. So just by and he's right, I think, in the sense that if he's not included, it does imply that there is something. You cannot help not, unless you understand like the nuances and everything else, you can't help not think, well, why have they done that? Or, you know, what if you're separating things out and you're making a special case for this or that? Like, what is going on? So it's understandable.
Which is why he then posted on Instagram a post that basically threw a lot of mud, and almost attacked as defense rather than explained, if you know what I mean by that. Yeah. And so I then went to try and understand, to try and represent, and it was
try and get him on the podcast. That's not it.
Well, I mean, part of me is thinking, should we just have a conversation to understand? And actually, it's partly to understand, I guess, the American sensibility towards this, because it wasn't as if Joe seemed to be an outlier from ultra running, because it was, you were from North America, like Ryan Atkins, you've got Camille Herron, I think Zach Miller. You know, we're talking the big dogs of North American ultra running, and the high level sport were absolutely tearing into Quartz.
Oh, were they? Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a bigger issue then, isn't there? There's a bigger issue that talks about, you know, how, you know, so Camille was there as well. Camille has been like
and well. Camille was saying, like, her, because I was saying to people that we want testing, we want to ensure we don't use TUEs, we want to ensure that, but their view is all WADA should do it, and they're like, well, WADA won't do it, and we still want this, and they're like, no, they will do it because they do it in North America, and you're like, okay, but that doesn't mean
there's a certain, I mean, that's the thing, there's a certain amount of like American exceptionalism that just doesn't really understand how things work outside of America. It's just, you know, globally it doesn't quite work the same.
And then particularly as we'll go to we're going to Madeira. We are, last time we were in the, you know, El Hierro and the Canary Islands and all these things where and it could, maybe it is down to cost partly as well. I don't know. You know, I'm just relaying what I know to be the facts as I've been told. But also Camille, for example, was saying that she thinks all races should be under associations, and you're like, I fundamentally, while I think that's nice, And I think there's an element of, it would be great if they all were, because then we could probably position ourselves well to trying to get trail running in the Olympics. There's a, if I was at any big race, why would I suddenly? It's like someone saying the beerathon has to be under UK Athletics. I'm like, go fuck yourself. I've created this race. I do it how I want to do it. What the hell do you know about my sport? You're some random committee of people who are set up for these reasons, and that has nothing to do with what I do.
The thing is, that's coming from American perspective. Imagine that. Imagine if American races weren't under association, and then you told them that they had to be under association. It would be very, very different that way around, wouldn't it?
Yeah, imagine if we were saying all American races have to be under French association, or what? And so
the paperwork will go through the roof.
But I think the trouble as well is that the North Americans' experience of Quartz is UTMB. That's it. Until this. And so they'll then come over and suddenly having to do this very, and if you look at Quartz's website, it's very hard to actually understand what it does. And even we had a meeting with the athletes where it was explained the reasons behind why Quartz is used.
Why did you have a meeting with the athletes? Was that specifically to explain that?
Yeah, just more than anything else, to partly to explain, partly to just listen. I think the Golden Trail is incredibly good at listening to what the athletes want, because I think Greg, I know Greg, who is the founder of the Golden Trail, he realizes for the Golden Trail dream to develop as being the #1 trail series and to grow, it requires the athletes to come and do it and to want to be involved. And so part of that is creating things like the US road trip, where athletes go and have this incredible experience for 2 weeks in America, running these amazing races, but also seeing Moab Desert and these beautiful places. But it's also having the confidence and the trust of the athletes and their health and safety. And so
as a result of that meeting, then, did that allay their concerns, or is there still a?
Well, it's very much an ongoing process, and but I think in North America in particular, there's so little contact with Quartz that if people try and understand it, to go on their website, it's very hard to actually understand what is Quartz actually. Is it here?
It's like trying to book the MDS yourself.
Yeah. It is. Yeah, it's that type of thing.
Yeah.
Where is Quartz?
It's not made to be a global organization. That's the thing. It needs to think like, it's almost like you've got the total. You've got America, which is kind of very inward looking, and then you have France, which is probably the only country that's more inward looking. Trying to communicate, like there's not any meeting whatsoever in terms of trying to help, because we know the French absolutely fight against anything that is possibly American, and there's no way in hell they're ever even going to have an English language part of that website that you're allowed to understand. So it's a characterization and it's a caricature, but anyone that's ever had to deal with that in any situation knows that is not, it's not that far off.
And Quartz, I think, has not realized that, yes, they're clients of the races, but their clients are the athletes just as much.
Yeah.
And so in trying to, what the main thing that came across from athletes in America who really hated Quartz was that they didn't understand what it was, which is very easy to see why if you go on the website. Is it there for drug testing? And actually, this is the area I'm still not 100% sure of myself. Are they testing for every kind of drug? I don't honestly know. Are they there just for because it talks to itself as like this almost welfare program? Is how it positions itself.
How do we even look it up? How do we look it up? What is the website? What's the name of the organization?
This is the hard thing, because the Quartz program is part of a website within it's a subcategory of a broader website.
Oh no.
Yeah, so it's ultrasportscience.org, and with Sierras Now, for example, there's then the added complexity of WADA were involved, because Sierras Now wanted them there, and Golden Trail's involved, and so rather than testing twice, the Quartz said, we defer, we're WADA testing, so we're not going to test on this occasion, because we don't want to have to test people twice, partly because it's quite an invasive procedure, but partly at times, but also because it's just very hard to coordinate lots and lots of athletes very quickly, and doing all the tests and dots, duplicating that. And so suddenly, when WADA announced that Mark has been banned, and why weren't Quartz testing him in advance? And well, because Quartz was testing the top 10, no one heard of Mark, and then WADA were doing the tests at the race.
Right.
So there's this huge misapprehension as to why Quartz is involved in these organizations and what it's there for. And Quartz itself doesn't know how to position itself. And so instead of saying, and I still don't, I don't know if they are testing for every type of illegal drug for doping. I don't know. So it's a very frustrating and confusing situation for everyone involved, it seems. And so this is where we are in the sport, and it's just quite odd in that it's the biggest race series in trail running, and it's the biggest race series in ultra running, and Quartz is right at the center of this. And while Quartz have said that they would introduce more stringent kind of testing facilities and testing protocols of doing 2 samples and things like that, which I think will reassure the athletes more. We're always going to have this conflict with, I think, American athletes who don't understand what it's for and don't want to have to do another test that when they're governed by WADA.
Yeah.
So that's what I kind of wanted to explain to people, that this conflict exists, because I don't know if many people do understand or know about it, and if they do, probably realize just how much conflict and why the conflict is there. Yeah, so that's Quartz.
Wow.
Question: Do we want to talk to Joe about it? That's
well, I think for the sake of balance, I mean, we can't talk to American sensibilities because we're not American, obviously.
Yeah.
As much as we want to be, but we can't. We have to hear that perspective, I think.
Yeah.
And so definitely, whether it's him or someone else, what is the issue with what they see the issue is with the Quartz program.
And maybe if Jay doesn't want to do it, we can speak to Camille and just say, Camille, come on, tell us, represent.
Yeah, I think there's just having just some indication, because I think the thing is with this is that it's like everyone's still on the same side. That's it, isn't it? It's like everyone wants the sport to be clean. And so it's not as if but it's the way that you're going about it, and what are the genuine concerns that someone has with a program that isn't based in the US. I mean, the thing is, I'm looking at I've just looked at the website for Quartz. I've looked at they're on Twitter and stuff like that, and I mean it kind of seems there's a touch of amateurism to the whole thing, which I think it doesn't instill a huge amount of confidence.
And I guess it's communication created by scientists.
Well, that's it, isn't it? that is it. I mean, it's the case of this is the right thing to do, so you should do it without selling into, we need to communicate better why this is the right thing to do. And get people to buy into it. It's kind of like, I suppose that's the difference, isn't it? That's the difference between a European approach and and I would say Gallic approach to an American approach. A Gallic approach is very much top down. This is what we're doing. American approach is we've got to get everyone to fucking buy into this because no one's going to do it, and someone will pull out a gun or some shit like that will go down. Which I think, there's two fundamentally different groups. British, we just feel like, oh, we're really sorry. Yes, we'll do whatever you say. Whatever you say. If it's whatever's easiest for you.
Yeah. Well, I'll reach out to and that's the thing. It's a clash of cultures.
It is a clash of cultures, yeah.
But I find it fascinating, and you're right. That's the crazy thing. Everyone wants the same thing.
Yeah. Or do they? No.
Or do they?
Well, unless they're Russian, in which case.
But I'll message Jody.
Or Kenyan. Oh.
But do badders. Can you message us and let us know if you give a shit?
Well, we can make this very clear, can't we? That we're specifically talking about Quartz on this, so you can skip this one if you don't. If you're not interested in it. I mean,
we're doing this. This isn't about stuff. This is an episode because we almost want it to be the same as.
We want David to lose his job. That's what we want.
Yeah, exactly.
Next week we talk about the dangers of caffeine. We want to destroy every income stream that he has.
True. Then you're gonna murder Briggsy. Bloody hell!
You bastards! You've taken everything.
You've taken everything.
Then we're gonna ban darts.
Oh mate, if you stop Ross giving me lifts in his car. So I'm going to put in the group and just ask people, do they know what Quartz is and what's your view of it?
But, know what Quartz is because we've recorded an hour-long episode. If you don't,
but do that. I mean, feedback is this like? Well, the question at the beginning was more: do you want us to go down a rabbit hole of Kenya? And if so, do you know anyone? Because I find it fascinating. Maybe I'll reach out to Rob Kohler again and ask him if he knows someone, just because drugs is really impacting our sport, and every day just the confidence in it, the fact that people don't want to watch, all these things. And so, do you find it as interesting as I do? And do you think it does impact the sport as much as I think?
We need to have a spin-off podcast called Bad Boy Doping, where it's just focused on talk about drugs.
Well, weirdly, I had an idea the other day of once I'm back running, just to every Sunday in the morning take a different run with no plan of a run, and then to just see what happens. What run do I choose to do? Where do I go? What do I do in it? Just to give you an idea of how that impacts on how drugs impact your running in a different way. Psychedelic drugs rather than all types of drugs. But we'll see if that ever happens.
I do think that there's a YouTube video to be made about different drugs, events, stuff like that. There absolutely is.
Yeah, for sure. And so I know in the past someone had recommended a runner who talks about lots of different drugs when they run. I've lost those details, so if you can message again if you want to suggest them as a guest. Yeah, I mean, anything...
You missed the opportunity for a really good joke there, David. Really, really good opportunity, but never mind.
Oh, sorry, no, I've been... But yeah, I guess I wanted to cover this subject. Anything else to throw? If you've enjoyed this episode, then go and listen to the Stepanovs episode, because we spoke to the Stepanov whistleblowers, who she was a 800 meter runner, 400 meter runner, so 800 meter runner, 1500 meter runner, who was part of the program, flipped. They both now live in America somewhere, undercover, having had new lives. We spoke to Rob Kohler, who was ex-Director General of WADA, to talk about how that system works. We're still trying to speak to someone from the Athletics Integrity Unit, that was called. they're yet to come back to me, even though they've messaged and stuff. But yeah, those 2 episodes are really, really interesting. Any other ones you'd recommend? You think linking?
So I think the Rob Kohler one's really interesting because for all we've been talking about, WADA, he's ex-WADA. All we've been talking about WADA and how tight they are on things and everything. He has a different perspective. So that's probably one of the most interesting episodes I've ever listened to that we've been part of on the podcast. So definitely worth going back to that one.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for listening, guys. Any suggestions of future topics or guests, then message me directly.
Doesn't have to be about drugs. Doesn't have to be about cheating. Doesn't have to be about greenwashing or us slagging off sponsors of major associations. We do talk about other stuff as well.
We do.
I can't think what at this stage. This is the problem. When we don't run, all of a sudden we turn into like investigative journalism, and we try and we start going for associations. We need to start running. We need to make sure we're both running again, so that it lightens the mood.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're going to leave us a review, the phrase you've got to get in your review is "you dirty, dirty cheats." You dirty, dirty cheats. So see if you can work that into a 5-star review that somehow is complimentary. That would be, we'll read it out next time. Thanks for listening, guys. And we'll see you soon.
See you later. Bye.
Fuck you, buddy.